This is, for me, I've been covering the sector for 12 years. When I was global head of Islamic finance at Moody's, we were rating the Sukuk, looking at the legal documents. It's very complicated. I'm going to try to demystify some of this for you and show actually it doesn't need to be that complicated, and ultimately institutions like ESCA can actually help make this a simpler market. This is why Islamic finance, I think Islamic finance is actually good from an economic standpoint, not just from a religious one. In an Islamic finance system, you wouldn't have $21 trillion worth of debt for the USA, $135,000 for every man, woman, and child, for every tax-paying citizen, sorry. Islamic finance, you can change the word Islamic for equity or asset. Islamic finance is about equity finance or asset-backed finance. The idea that you can just raise debt with no genuine economic or tangible purpose is something that is discouraged in Islam. So, two key elements: prohibition of interest-based income, encouragement of tangible, asset-backed, real economy, all these things that are good for society as a whole. Equity financing is much closer to Sharia. Most of the problems that you see today around debt and inequality, call it Greece, call it sovereign debt crisis, it's all about printing money, people buying things they don't need with money they don't have. But unfortunately, most market at the moment wants a debt-type instrument, so this is where you have Islamic finance bashing heads with the debt markets. The Islamic markets and the most important people are the investors and the issuers. The scholars, the bankers, the lawyers, even people like myself, we're not really that important. It's the people with the money and the people who need the money. They're the ones who decide the shape of the market. I'm going to go through some structures here. Now, you don't have to really understand them. All you need to know is that they're complicated. That's the real takeaway. So this is a wakala structure, lots of boxes, lots of arrows. You have this thing here. This becomes very important later on. From this whole diagram, as long as you see this term purchase undertaking, exercise price, this changes everything. So you have these Islamic structures, each one for a specific economic purpose, as we'll see. But then with a bit of legal engineering, you introduce this, and you get back to a bond-type structure. So this is a wakala sukuk, an ijara sukuk, and look, here we have purchase, sale undertaking. So until you have this part, it's behaving like a lease type structure. Everybody knows what a lease is. You have an asset, you pay rental payments, etc., etc. Here's a mudaraba structure. Again, purchase undertaking. So up until this point, if you were to cross this out, it's behaving like almost like an asset kind of management agreement. So here you have three very different structures: wakala, mudaraba, ijara, which in Islamic finance are three very different things. You add one contract, they become the same, effectively, from a risk and return standpoint. Last one I'm going to cover here, again, musharaka, partnership arrangement, equity joint venture. Add this element, you get back to a bond or debt structure. I'm going to ask a question. Who knows what the fifth structure is I'm going to present on the next slide? Any takers? Murabaha? Okay, that is one, but that's not the next one I've chosen. Bond. You can see how simple this is. So all of those previous structures all come back to this. This is what the investors want. And so for me, when I was looking in my career at Moody's at probably 50 different sukuk, hundreds of pages of legal documentation, all trying to do this. And this is a big issue in Islamic finance. Now, the fact is we have to be practical. The market exists. As was shown in the previous presentation, 100 billion issued last year. Investors, they want a debt-type instrument. Issuers, they want a debt-type instrument. Saudi Arabia wants a debt-type instrument. It doesn't want to give equity. It doesn't want to give land. It wants to borrow the money and to spend it on social programs, etc. Now, they could build a school directly with a Sukuk. That would be very Sharia compliant. They could build a road. But it's very complicated to do that. They said, look, just give us the money, we will borrow it, and then we will spend it. So this is what the market wants. And so all of this legal structuring, everything, all these pages, comes to this. So that's the challenge. When you're looking at Islamic finance, when you're looking at Sukuk, you look at all these structures, all these arrows, all these boxes, and you get confused. You know, what is happening here? Where is the money going? And in the end, because of those red circles that I showed, you get back to a bond structure. And this is why I think for what it is, the market is too complex. You accept you have to be practical. The market is behaving like this. What can ESCA do? What can central bank do to try to standardize this market and to make it easier for other private sector corporates to come in? Because I'm at the moment working with smaller private sector corporates. When I tell them that to do a Sukuk with lawyer fees, fatwa fees, rating fees, cost them $500,000, I just stick with the bank. You know, I'm not going to do the Sukuk market. So the volume that we saw in the charts before, governments, banks, they don't need to worry about this so much. But if you want to really have a private sector, corporate Sukuk market, domestic, like Malaysia, these issues need to be tackled. This diagram, it's a bit famous. It's more than 10 years old. I've had it from my slide 10 years ago. And it's quite sad to say it hasn't really changed because it reflects the fact that the market really hasn't changed. But this is why you see some very funky colors and all these sorts of things that when I was younger I used to practice with. But up until this point, you have like a lease structure. You have assets, you have a sale of assets, you have a lease, but then right at the very end, bang, you have an asset purchase structure which says, whatever assets I gave you in the Sukuk, I buy it back from you at 100. This is your principle, effectively. This is how you get back to a bond. Even though there are assets, even though there are lease, the lease payment will pay you 5% a year. The asset really still belongs to me, and I buy it back. So I gave you 100, you gave me 100, and in the end I gave you back 100 plus 5%. It's a bond. Meanwhile, you've incurred a lot of complicated legal expenses, rating expenses, et cetera, et cetera. If you're ever looking at a Sukuk, look for this contract. If there's one contract like this, then you know the performance is like a bond. So all of those 600 pages, you don't have to read them. You just have to look for this one. So the key takeaway from that session, you will see Wakala, you will see Ijara, you will see all of these. Now, 95% of Sukuk are like a bond. So this doesn't really matter. This terminology is being in some ways abused. And this, as we shall see, is what has led to Dana gas. There's a tension between the equity and asset principles of Islamic finance and debt. The two things don't really fit together very well. So people are getting very twisted into trying to make these structures look like debt. So Dana gas. This is the share price of Dana gas. This is what happened when they announced that their Sukuk was not compliant with Sharia principles of the UAE. Bang. Up again, 100, up again, up again. 85%. One of the Sukuk in Dana gas is a convertible. So in theory, that convertible should convert into equity, and you can see why Dana gas doesn't want to convert, because all of the equity holders of Dana gas will get diluted. So it's not really, in my view, about Islamic finance or Sharia compliance. It's economics. Most of these things, it's about finance, money, land, but what is different is that in a Sukuk, you now have a difference with a bond. They couldn't do this with a bond. But because there's a complexity in the UAE civil code, specific to the UAE, their lawyers are very clever. They've found a way not to pay and not to default. It's because they're still in court. And we'll go into this in a second. But this, in my view, is what I think is driving this, and so far it's working. This is Dana gas's Sukuk structure. As you can see, very complicated. Oh, look, there's an exercise price. So whatever the Mudaraba assets were, Dana Gas will buy it back from you at par value. This is your principal exchange that you would see in a bond. Dana is arguing, now that they took the money, when it comes to repay the money, actually, you know, it's not Sharia compliant. This should really be a proper Mudaraba where we share the, you know, you provide the capital, I manage it for you, and if you lose money on the capital, well, you know, this was what we did. So now that they have the money, they don't want to pay. But you couldn't do this with the bond, so this is the risk. But it's not a risk for the sovereign. Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, they don't need to find a legal loophole. If they don't want to pay, they can change the law. So the sovereign, debt market, Sukuk market, unaffected. Banks too, relatively unaffected. The bank can't go to the central bank and say, oh, I didn't know this was not Sharia compliant. The regulator will go, what are you talking about? You're a bank. If you don't know, then who knows? Who is affected? Private sector corporates. And this is the market that you're trying to grow in the GCC. You want to get more genuine domestic debt, Sukuk markets. This hurts them. But this is a very small market. So that's why you won't see much of an impact on the charts that we saw previously. UAE Civil Code, 1986. I was 12 in 1986. When they did the Sukuk, who looked back? No one looked back. So in the UAE Civil Code, there is actually a definition of how Mudaraba should behave, going to the Islamic principles. Later on, somebody took the Mudaraba, made it into a bond. Now, Dana Gas is saying, under UAE Civil Code, this is how it should behave. You should also lose money. I don't have to pay you back the full amount. And this is what's going back and forth. So Dana Gas is saying, our Sukuk now, after taking the money, now we're saying it doesn't comply with the UAE Civil Code. So this is something that should have been done right at the beginning. So,
It was not highlighted in the contract.
no, of course not. No, because when they took the money, this was not of relevance. It's only when you have to pay back the money this becomes important. So, I mean, somebody told me Dana's done a very bad thing in a very clever way. So, you know. So the conflict between the UAE definition of Mudaraba and the English law-based structure, the purchase undertaking, is what's causing this and what's given Dana the opportunity to do this. And now this has gone beyond Islamic finance. This is now about international law versus local law. So this goes beyond Sukuk. Any Sharjah company or any UAE company, if this doesn't go the right way, then this has impact for beyond Islamic finance. So it's, in my view, it's a matter almost now of public policy for the UAE because the reputation of Islamic finance and so on, in my view, is being affected by this. And I'm aware, whereas institutional money is not investing in government bonds, they are waiting to see the outcome of this case because everybody told them it was just like a bond, and now you have $700 million worth of investors who are not getting their money back. That's an important development. What is Dana offering? Now, even if it wasn't compliant, Dana can restructure the Sukuk to make it compliant, but still pay the same. But they want to pay half the profit rate, a tenor of 4 years, no conversion. They want to remove the convertible because now the equity price has gone up. They don't want the convertible. Whereas, of course, the Sukuk holder, he wants the convertible. That's why he bought the Sukuk. It was a risky company. He accepted a lower profit rate because there's an upside option for the equity. That's why he did it. Either way, now the creditors have been weakened in the negotiation. Now maybe they're thinking, I'm happy if I get my money back, forget the convertible. So it's already working. This is from the legal documentation. Dana has agreed under the English law documents to submit will first apply English law rather than Sharia principles. So even within the legal contract, they've said they will follow English law. None of the trustee, Dana Gas, will make any representation. So here they're saying to investors, look, right now we believe it's Sharia compliant. You're happy, I'm happy. We will do the transaction. But then when it came to paying back, they've ignored even the language in their own documentation. So again, this shouldn't be happening, but here we are. On the 17th of December, the English court said that the purchase undertaking is enforceable. So on all those diagrams, that red circle that you saw, that the investors are relying upon, English court said, yes, of course, it's a contract. You took the money, you pay back. Okay, it's a good result. Problem over, no one needs to worry. English court denies appeal. Sharjah court issues ruling to ignore the UK court and that they will hear the court. Dana then says, I'm going to pay a 5% dividend to the shareholders even while I'm in dispute on the Sukuk. Sukuk holders are, what are you talking about? We haven't even fixed this case and you want to give money to the equity. So then the UK court says, no, you cannot pay. So now you have this legal tug of war between Sharjah and England, English law. And so the investors still don't have the money. Meanwhile, Dana Gas share price went up again. They signed another contract with Kurdistan. So you can argue a distressed restructuring is a normal course of life. It's nothing to do with Islamic finance. If a company is in problem, you sit down, you work it out, and hopefully you fix the issue. Dana Gas is getting stronger and stronger and stronger, and yet they're still not willing to pay the money to the Sukuk holders. So that's where the ethical element comes in. But there's a lot of money on the table here. You're talking upside of 20, 30, 40, $50 million that can be taken from the equity and given to the debt effectively. So it's economics that drive it. But just to show the complexity of Sukuk has allowed the exploitation by a defaulter. So this is where the last part, very short. In my view, the GCC Sukuk market has been very open, very free. Everybody does what they want. Malaysia, it's much more standardized, much more top-down, National Sharia Board, the Securities Commission. Everybody's working together, and they've created a very standardized liquid market. Investors, issuers, they all know the instruments that are being traded. It's much more cost-efficient, etc. Here, when every Sukuk is maybe a different structure or a different sort of set of documentation, it means an investor has to look at every Sukuk individually. Every Sukuk, if it's not necessarily part of a standard, maybe this one is vulnerable to a Dana Gas type challenge. It's expensive. When you have more standardized Sukuk, the cost falls, and then maybe more private sector corporates can start to issue Sukuk. So in my view, the goal should be satisfying the needs of issuers and investors. A lot of advice, and my apologies to any lawyers or Sharia scholars or bankers in the room, you should ignore them. Because while the market is more complicated, it benefits them. A standardized market is actually, for a Sharia scholar, if central bank gives one fatwa and says, look, this is our central bank endorsed Sukuk al-Mudaraba, that means all of that business now, the corporates can use this structure, but then all of the other service providers, they lose out. But you can argue the market gets bigger. You know, it's the bond market. People could try and keep the bond market complicated. They haven't. But look at the size of it, $20 trillion. So in my view, having a standardized market means things become cheaper and simpler. In the short term, that might hurt some people, even people like me. But in the long term, it grows faster, quicker, deeper, all these good things about standards. National Sharia boards. If there was a Sukuk endorsed by ESCA and it had the National Sharia Board approval, you think Dana Gas could then say this Sukuk is not Sharia compliant? They would go against the National Sharia Board. They can't. You think the Sharjah court would say, exactly. So this is, you know, I see some nodding heads. So the solution is relatively simple. It's been out there for over 10 years, but no one's really interested in doing it because it breaks the business model for a lot of people. But meanwhile, it's only the rich issuers, sovereigns, banks who can do, you know, they can afford this. The fatwa scholars, they charge 50,000 every single fatwa. If National Sharia Board provides one and says, Esker, this is your mudaraba sukuk, it's a problem for some people. So this is, I'm being very open here, but this is why it's taken so long. Benefits, reduce Sharia uncertainty. You wouldn't have a Dana gas type problem if central bank higher Sharia board says, this is my approved wakala, this is my approved. You can use it, you don't have to, so it should never be compulsory. Standard should be about, well, I say compulsory, but this is the endorsed one. If you want to use something else, you can, but then the investor will say, why are you not using the Esker standard? So then you let the market choose. You shouldn't force people to say, use this. You say, look, this is the one that we like. This is the one we think works. This will have more confidence for the market. You don't have to use it. You can use it, up to you. Reduce legal risk. So all of these things are good for a domestic sukuk market if Esker and central bank can get together. The negative, the one that I always hear against standardization, people say, oh, it reduces innovation. You know, it reduces flexibility, it reduces creativity. I don't think it's innovation to find 5 different ways or 50 different ways to replicate a bond and to make it more complicated so that people like Dana can then use it. That's not innovation for me. So when 95% of the market wants a bond-type instrument, give them a standardized bond type and let them use it. And for those people who want the genuine, more asset-backed, esoteric, equity-sharing, asset-backed, they can do that. But this just says for the rest of the market, at least we have a standard, and investors, international investors, can be comfortable with that. That's it, really. Thank you very much.